In February 1944, the Japanese stronghold of Truk Lagoon erupted in fire. For years, it had been called the Gibraltar of the Pacific, the centerpiece of Japan's island empire and the anchorage of its mighty fleet. But, in just 2 days, American carrier aircraft turned this fortress into a graveyard. Over 50 ships were sunk or destroyed, hundreds of aircraft obliterated, and Japan's forward naval base was left shattered beyond repair. This is the story of Operation Hailstone, the raid that crushed Truk and silenced Japan's greatest bastion in the Pacific. Truk Lagoon was the linchpin of Japan's outer defensive ring. Seized from Germany in World War I, these Caroline Islands were developed into a powerful naval and air hub by the 1930s. By the onset of war with the United States, Truk had become the forward headquarters of Japan's combined fleet, a vast anchorage protected by barrier reefs, shore batteries, 5 airfields, and a seaplane base. American intelligence viewed Truk as a Pacific equivalent of Pearl Harbor, heavily fortified and bristling with aircraft, a citadel guarding the approaches to Japan's conquests in Southeast Asia. Throughout 1942 to 43, Japanese fleet units, battleships, carriers, cruisers, operated from Truk to challenge US advances. But by late 1943, Japan's strategic position was crumbling. Twin Allied offensives were converging. General MacArthur's forces pushed through the Southwest Pacific, and Admiral Chester Nimitz's Central Pacific Drive leapt from the Gilberts to the Marshalls. By early 1944, American planners set their sights on the Marianas and the Palaus, leaps that would put US bombers in range of Japan. Truk, lying squarely on the supply lines and flanks of this advance, posed an unacceptable threat. Aircraft based at Truk could strike any US invasion force, and its sheltered lagoon could harbour a counter-attacking Japanese fleet. However, Truk was also one of the most heavily defended Japanese bases outside the home islands. A direct invasion would have been a bloodbath, and even prolonged long-range bombing would be perilous while the base remained intact. Instead, Allied commanders conceived a bold alternative: neutralise Truk by a massive fast carrier raid. This plan took shape as Operation Hailstone, timed to precede and protect the imminent US invasion of Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshalls. In mid-February 1944, as American reconnaissance liberators scouted overhead, Admiral Raymond Spruance gave the green light for a surprise multi-pronged strike on Truk. Crucially, the Japanese had gotten hints of the storm coming their way. Intelligence from reconnaissance sightings and code intercepts prompted the Imperial Japanese Navy to withdraw its most precious capital ships from Truk shortly before the raid. In early February 1944, Admiral Minechi Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, ordered the bulk of fleet carriers, battleships, and heavy cruisers to safer harbours westward. By February 17th, only a rearguard remained at Truk: 2 old light cruisers, 8 destroyers, and about 50 auxiliary vessels, transports, and merchant ships still crowded the lagoon. Though spared a showdown with Japan's main battle fleet, the US strike would still find plenty of high-value prey in the form of troop transports, tankers, submarine tenders, and smaller warships caught at anchor. Before we continue, today's video is sponsored by World of Warships. World of Warships is a free-to-play, massively multiplayer naval combat game featuring hundreds of historically inspired warships from the first half of the 20th century. If you're a naval fanatic like us, you'll appreciate that these ships are drawn from real historical designs, built using original documents and actual blueprints, bringing them to life in ways that old film and images simply can't. You can sail on your own, or team up with friends using divisions to coordinate tactics and fleet roles, commanding destroyers, cruisers, battleships, aircraft carriers, and submarines, each filling a different role within a fleet. The game continues to evolve with regular monthly updates that add new ships, new nations, and rotating events and cosmetics, so there's always something new to explore. There have also been major visual improvements over time, including upgraded maps, water effects, lighting, and dynamic weather, which make engagements feel more alive and immersive than ever before. If you're a new player, use the link in the description or pinned comment, and enter code IMPACTFORCE when you register to receive special in-game rewards to help you get started. World of Warships is also available on console as World of Warships Legends. Operation Hailstone was meticulously planned to deliver a knockout blow in a short window. Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitcher's Fast Carrier Task Force, Task Force 58, part of Spruance's 5th Fleet, assembled an overwhelming concentration of naval power. 3 of TF-58's 4 carrier task groups sortied toward Truk, comprising 5 fleet carriers, USS Enterprise, Yorktown, CV-10, Essex, Intrepid, Bunker Hill, and 4 light carriers, USS Belleau Wood, Cabot, Monterey, and Cowpens. These 9 carriers fielded over 500 planes. Escorted by 6 new fast battleships, including the Iowa-class USS Iowa and USS New Jersey, about 10 cruisers, and 28 destroyers, plus supporting submarines, the battle plan was bold and multi-dimensional. In the pre-dawn darkness of February 17, 1944, Mitcher would launch a massive fighter sweep to sweep the skies over Truk and strafe airfields, achieving air superiority at the outset. Immediately after, waves of dive bombers and torpedo planes would hammer airstrips, supply dumps, and ships in the lagoon. The goal was to catch the Japanese by surprise, with minimal warning, timing the first strike just before dawn when enemy pilots would least expect it. US submarines were stationed at the exits of Truk's atoll passages to intercept any ships that tried to flee to open ocean. Meanwhile, Admiral Spruance himself embarked on New Jersey and held a surface bombardment group, Task Group 50.9, in reserve, ready to circle the atoll and engage escaping vessels or shore targets with naval gunfire. The Americans effectively planned to bottle up Truk, smash its air power, then annihilate any and all ships within reach in a 48-hour blitz. For the US aviators and sailors, this raid would test the striking power of the Fast Carrier Task Force concept to its limits. Morale was high and fueled by a sense of anticipation. Many remembered Pearl Harbor and now felt Japan's supposedly impregnable base was about to get its comeuppance. However, there was also uncertainty. Aerial photos and intel suggested formidable anti-aircraft defenses and hundreds of enemy aircraft at Truk. The task force was ordered to hit hard and withdraw fast, striking a balance between aggression and avoiding prolonged exposure to counterattack. Thus, as dusk fell on February 16th, TF-58 reached its launch point 90 miles northeast of Truk. In the carrier's ready rooms, pilots studied aerial maps of the lagoon's anchorages and rehearsed attack runs. On deck, bombs and torpedoes were readied en masse. The stage was set for one of the Pacific War's most audacious raids. Dawn, February 17, 1944. From the pitching decks of 9 American carriers, the first wave of fighters roared into the air in the darkness. At 5 to 6:30, Task Force 58 launched 72 F-6F Hellcat fighters, which arrived over Truk just as the sky began to lighten. Exploiting complete surprise, US fighters pounced on Japanese planes sitting on airstrips and those just scrambling to take off. The IJN had roughly 350 planes based at Truk, but many were caught off guard. Pilots of the 22nd and 26th Air Flotillas were reportedly at breakfast or on shore leave after weeks of high alert. Japanese radar was short-ranged and failed to detect the low-flying approach. The result was carnage in the air. Hellcats tore through the few defending Mitsubishi Zero fighters that managed to get airborne. In minutes, over 24 Zeros were shot down for minimal American losses. US fighters then swept over the airfields at Eaton, Moen, Param, and Dublon Islands, raking parked bombers and fighters with machine gun fire and dropping parachute fragmentation bombs. Within the first hours, at least 30 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in the air and another 40+ wrecked on the ground. The skies above Truk were effectively won by the Americans by mid-morning of day 1. With air superiority assured, waves of US carrier bombers now zeroed in on the shipping scattered around Truk's vast lagoon. Dozens of Japanese vessels, warships and merchants alike, lay at anchor or attempting to get underway. Caught by surprise, few had steamed up or could escape the atoll's confines in time. Anti-aircraft gunners on island bases and ship decks opened fire, but soon found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers swooping down through the tropical skies, as Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers and TBF Avenger torpedo planes pressed home attacks on ships clustered off Dublon and Phaethon Islands. By mid-morning, pillars of thick black smoke coiled into the sky from multiple vessels hit and burning. One of the most spectacular strikes came against the 10,000-ton transport Ikoku Maru, a former armed merchant cruiser loaded with ammunition and fuel. Lieutenant James E. Bridges, piloting an Avenger from USS Intrepid, released a torpedo that struck Ikoku Maru amidships. An instant later, at 8:14, the ship erupted like a volcano, a colossal explosion ripping Ikoku Maru apart and sending a fireball high above the lagoon. The blast was so powerful, it obliterated the ship and even shattered Bridges' own aircraft flying overhead, tragically killing the pilot and his 2 crewmates. Witnesses described the explosion's shockwave as astounding. When the smoke cleared, Ikoku Maru was gone, sunk in seconds with over 700 souls. Nearby vessels shook from the detonation, a vivid example of the devastation being visited upon the Japanese fleet that day. Elsewhere, precision American attacks took a steady toll. The light cruiser Naka, flagship of Rear Admiral Ito's Cruiser Division 14, attempted to flee the lagoon at high speed. She was spotted off Uman Island and swarmed by torpedo bombers and dive bombers from USS Yorktown and Essex. Struck by an aerial torpedo and bombs, Naka broke in 2 and sank around noon on the 17th, taking 240 crew down. The destroyer Oite, an antiquated kamikaze-class escort, met a particularly poignant fate. Just the day before, Oite had departed Truk to escort the light cruiser Agano towards safety, only for Agano to be torpedoed and sunk by the American submarine USS Skate on February 16th. Oite rescued 523 survivors from Agano and rushed back to Truk to help defend the base. Now, as Oite re-entered Truk Lagoon at midday on the 17th, she sailed straight into the teeth of the US air assault. A flight of Avengers from USS Bunker Hill attacked Oite as she maneuvered at over 20 knots through Truk's North Pass. In a remarkable feat of airmanship, one Avenger planted a torpedo squarely amidships on the zigzagging destroyer. The hit blew Oite in half. The warship sank so swiftly that almost no one topside escaped. All 523 Agano survivors perished in Oite's hold, and of Oite's own crew of 172, only about 20 were found alive, the rest entombed in seconds beneath the waves. This grim episode underscored the relentless completeness of the American attack. Even those few Japanese sailors who had survived one sinking met death in another before the day was done. All through February 17th, chaos reigned in Truk Lagoon. US Navy pilots methodically worked down a target list that included oil tankers, freighters, submarine tenders, and naval auxiliaries. The lagoon's waters churned with oily flames as ship after ship was hit. The fleet oiler Shinkoku Maru was bombed and left a burning wreck. The tanker Fujisan Maru was set ablaze and sunk, and the giant whale factory ship turned auxiliary tanker Tonan Maru was strafed and destroyed. The converted seaplane tender Heian Maru took several bomb hits and went down stern first with her valuable cargo of torpedoes and munitions. Cargo vessels laden with troops and supplies also suffered. The Hoki Maru, Kiyosumi Maru, Yamagiri Maru, Fujikawa Maru, names that would later be known as part of Truk's Ghost Fleet, were smashed by bombs or torpedoes and settled to the bottom of the lagoon. Some ships tried to save themselves by beaching in shallow water or hiding in coves behind islands, only to be relentlessly pursued by strafing fighters and dive bombers. A few Japanese vessels that were outside the lagoon or attempted late dashes for open water fell prey to US submarines. The destroyer Fumizuki was torpedoed in the anchorage by planes and heavily damaged. A near-miss bomb concussion had ruptured her hull, and despite damage control efforts, Fumizuki foundered on the 18th. Another destroyer, Shigure, miraculously survived repeated near hits. This veteran of many battles escaped with moderate damage, a bomb to her No. 2 gun turret, and limped away, one of the sole Japanese destroyers to live through Hailstone. By nightfall on February 17th, the lagoon was littered with burning wrecks. That night, Truk's horizon glowed an eerie red from the oil fires, and secondary explosions from ammunition ships rippled across the darkness. The Japanese mounted a token counterstrike on the first night. Just before midnight on February 17th to 18th, a handful of twin-engine Betty bombers and other aircraft launched from Truk, and reportedly even from distant bases like the Marianas or Palau, attempted harassing raids on the US fleet. Flying low in the darkness, one Japanese bomber slipped through and managed a lucky hit. a torpedo slammed into the stern of the fleet carrier USS Intrepid. The explosion wrecked Intrepid's steering gear and killed 11 sailors, forcing the carrier to withdraw for repairs. Aside from this single audacious night strike, enemy resistance was negligible. Most Japanese aircrews had been wiped out or stranded without planes, and their navy had no surface forces left to challenge the US Armada. At dawn, US carrier squadrons renewed their onslaught to finish off any remaining targets. Throughout the 18th, bombing strikes hit straggling ships and shore installations. Meanwhile, Admiral Spruance was eager to engage with his surface warships. In the morning, reports came in of a small group of Japanese ships attempting to flee via Truk's North Pass. These were the remnants of the IJN task force that had sortied. The light cruiser Katori, Truk's guard flagship, her consort, the auxiliary armed cruiser Akagi Maru, a passenger liner converted to transport duties, destroyers Maikaze and Nowaki, and the little minesweeper Shonan Maru No. 15, already badly hit. Spruance, normally a cautious commander, seized the chance for a gunfire action. He personally took tactical command of Task Group 50.9 and ordered Mitch's carriers to hold back airstrikes on that fleeing flotilla, so that his battleships and cruisers could engage them in open water. Leading from USS New Jersey, Spruance's surface group steamed around the atoll to intercept. It consisted of battleships New Jersey and Iowa, heavy cruisers Minneapolis and New Orleans, and 4 destroyers screening, with air cover from a nearby carrier group. What followed was one of the few instances in World War II of US fast battleships engaging Japanese surface combatants. The confrontation was brutally one-sided. The already damaged Katori, trailing smoke from earlier bomb hits, bravely returned fire, but was hopelessly outgunned. Iowa and New Jersey opened up at long range with 16-inch salvos, straddling Katori with gigantic water plumes. Soon, Iowa found the range. A volley of 2,700-pound armor-piercing shells crashed into Katori, blowing her apart and leaving her dead in the water. The US cruisers and destroyers, for their part, engaged Maikaze. The Japanese destroyer made a daring last stand. Maikaze launched a spread of torpedoes at New Jersey amid the shell fire. Spruance's flagship narrowly avoided the torpedoes, and within minutes, Maikaze was riddled by cruiser gunfire and sank with all hands. The armed transport Akagi Maru was also caught in this skirmish. She absorbed several bomb hits from earlier air attack and now additional shell hits, eventually sinking later that day. The destroyer Nowaki, trailing behind, managed to turn and flee at high speed, skirting the edge of the American formation. Iowa and New Jersey hurled shells at Nowaki at extreme range, over 20 miles, as it sprinted away. But the nimble destroyer miraculously survived with only minor damage, disappearing over the horizon in a cloud of spray. By early afternoon on the 18th, Spruance's task group 50.9 had eliminated the last significant targets. In doing so, it became the only occasion in their careers where the legendary twin Iowa-class battleships Iowa and New Jersey fired their big guns at enemy ships. As the sun set on February 18th, the US fleet began retiring from Truk, having achieved overwhelming success. Fires continued to ravage the once formidable base. Truk's Lagoon was now a charnel house of shattered ships. In 2 days, American carrier aircraft and surface ships had sunk or fatally damaged close to 50 Japanese vessels of all types. The raiders also demolished Truk's airfields and infrastructure, destroying at least 250 Japanese aircraft on the ground or in dogfights. US losses were comparatively light. Aside from the torpedo damage to Intrepid and slight damage to one battleship's hull from a near miss, the Americans lost around 25 aircraft, mainly to flak or operational accidents, and 40 men killed. In every sense, Operation Hailstone had been a one-sided victory. The toll for the Imperial Japanese Navy was catastrophic. 10 Japanese naval combatants were sunk, including the light cruisers Katori and Naka, 4 destroyers, Maikaze, Oite, Fumizuki, Tachikaze, at least 2 submarine tenders, such as Hei and Maru, and multiple smaller escort vessels and patrol craft. In addition, the Americans sank approximately 32 merchant ships and naval auxiliaries, wiping out troop transports, cargo freighters, tankers, and supply ships essential to Japan's war effort. Among the most significant losses were fleet oilers like Shinkoku Maru and Tonan Maru No. 3, submarine depot ships, ammunition transports, and numerous cargo vessels that had been supporting Japanese garrisons across the Central Pacific. In total, roughly 200,000 tons of Japanese shipping was sent to the bottom in those 2 days. More than 4,500 Japanese officers and men, including many experienced sailors and pilots, were killed, either going down with their ships or in aerial combat and bombing raids. The Truk anchorage, once brimming with activity, had been transformed into a wreckage-strewn graveyard. Strategically, the Japanese naval position in the Central Pacific was irreparably damaged. The loss of several fleet oilers was particularly devastating. By early 1944, the IJN's ability to refuel and sortie its remaining capital ships was already strained. After Truk, it became critical. The destruction of fuel depots and stored supplies further compounded the problem. Equally irreplaceable were the cargo ships that went down, many laden with aircraft, ammunition, and provisions meant for isolated Japanese garrisons. At a stroke, Operation Hailstone nullified months of Japanese resupply efforts. On the American side, there was a mix of jubilation and mild disappointment. Jubilation at the raid's success was tempered only by the fact that the enemy fleet carriers and battleships had escaped by leaving Truk days earlier. Many US airmen had hoped to sink Japan's main battle fleet at anchor, but instead obliterated the base and its second-line vessels. Still, within US Navy circles, Operation Hailstone was hailed as a textbook example of carrier warfare. Vice Admiral Mitcher's coordinated strikes functioned with remarkable precision, and Spruance's surface engagement added a dramatic surface action element. The raid demonstrated beyond doubt the effectiveness of fast carriers, surprise, and intelligence in modern naval combat. In Tokyo, the shock was palpable. Truk had been considered nearly inviolable. Now it was burning. News of the disaster was initially censored to avoid panic, but the scale of the defeat soon became clear. Vice Admiral Masami Kobayashi, commander of the 4th Fleet responsible for Truk's local defense, was relieved of his post and later forced into retirement. Although little could have realistically stopped such an overwhelming attack, the disaster underscored the vulnerability of Japan's forward bases. Perhaps the most significant immediate aftermath was what did not happen. No invasion of Truk was needed. With its airfields wrecked and harbour unusable, Truk was bypassed and isolated as American forces advanced. Japanese personnel stranded on the atoll were left cut off for the remainder of the war, short on supplies and unable to pose any serious threat. Follow-up raids in 1944 and 1945 ensured Truk never recovered, and the base effectively ceased to matter as a fighting force. Operation Hailstone's results were immediate and irreversible. In 2 days, the US Navy destroyed nearly 50 Japanese ships and hundreds of aircraft, rendering Truk Lagoon, the centerpiece of Japan's outer defense ring, militarily useless. Oilers, transports, and supply ships were lost in large numbers, cutting off vital lifelines of fuel, ammunition, and provisions. More than 4,500 Japanese personnel were killed, and Japan's naval logistics suffered damage from which it never recovered. Without Truk, Japan no longer had a forward base capable of supporting large-scale fleet operations in the Central Pacific. Strategically, the raid allowed the United States to bypass what could have been a costly invasion and shift its focus to Eniwetok, the Marianas, and beyond. In the months that followed, US forces seized Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, placing direct pressure on Japan's defensive perimeter. The loss of a functioning forward base meant the combined fleet could not mount meaningful opposition to these advances and was forced to retreat toward the Philippines and the home islands. For the US Navy, Operation Hailstone confirmed the dominance of fast carrier task forces and the effectiveness of massed air power supported by surface forces and submarines. A heavily defended base had been neutralized without invasion, validating a strategy that would be repeated throughout the remainder of the Pacific War. For Japan, the psychological impact was severe. Truk, long considered nearly invulnerable, had been exposed as a hollow fortress. Confidence in forward island bases was shattered, and the loss of shipping further accelerated Japan's strangulation by Allied naval and air power. Ultimately, Operation Hailstone marked a decisive shift in the Central Pacific. The fortress at Truk was silenced, its lagoon transformed into a graveyard of ships and shattered infrastructure. From that point forward, the initiative belonged firmly to the United States, which now possessed the freedom to carry the war deeper into Japan's defensive perimeter.